The memo arrives at 2:47 a.m. Dean Martin is in his dressing room at the Sands wiping stage makeup from his face when a man in a gray suit appears at the door. No knock, no introduction, just a folded piece of paper extended toward the king of cool like a summons from God himself. "Mr. Hughes requests that you modify your act," the man says. His voice is flat, mechanical. "No more jokes about the boss, no more references to previous management, and your gambling privileges have been adjusted." Dean doesn't look at the memo. He doesn't look at the man. He simply lights a cigarette, takes a long drag and exhales the smoke in the general direction of where Howard Hughes sits, invisible 13 floors above, watching his empire through closed-circuit cameras like a spider in a web. "Tell your boss," Dean says, his voice barely above a whisper, "I don't work for ghosts." Those words would define everything that followed. But not yet. Not tonight. First, Dean Martin had to show the ghost what cool really meant. What Dean didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Howard Hughes had a list of people he intended to destroy. Frank Sinatra's name had already been crossed off. Dean Martin's name was next. But Hughes made one fatal miscalculation. He thought he could buy cool. He thought charm was just another commodity. He wasn't prepared for what happened next. He was about to learn that some things aren't for sale. To understand what happened that night, you have to understand what Howard Hughes did to Las Vegas in July 1967. Growing up in Steubenville, Ohio, Dean learned that there were two types of powerful men, those who demanded respect with their fists, and those who commanded it with silence. His father, Guy Crossetti, was a barber who served steel mill workers and mob bookies alike. He never raised his voice. But when a customer tried to skip out on a payment, Guy would simply put down his scissors and stare. The silence was more terrifying than any threat. Young Dino watched. Young Dino learned. And young Dino understood something that would serve him for the rest of his life. The loudest man in the room is never the most powerful. Howard Hughes was the richest man in America. He had bought RKO Studios. He had built airplanes that broke world records. He had dated the most beautiful women in Hollywood, including Ava Gardner, the one woman who had truly captured his heart. But Ava didn't love him back. Her heart belonged to Sinatra. She had left Hughes for Frank, and Hughes never forgot, never forgave. When he bought the Sands Hotel in July 1967 for $14.6 million, it wasn't just a business decision, it was revenge. Cold, calculated, patient revenge against Frank Sinatra and everything he represented. Hughes ran his empire from the 9th floor of the Desert Inn, a hermit surrounded by Mormon attendants, communicating only through memos and intermediaries. He never met with anyone. He was a ghost in a penthouse, a phantom billionaire pulling strings from the shadows. The Rat Pack represented everything Hughes despised: spontaneity, friendship, laughter, humanity. They were everything he couldn't buy, everything he could never be. But what Hughes didn't understand, what billionaires rarely understand, is that you can't destroy joy by acquiring it. You can only destroy yourself trying. That night in September 1967, when Hughes's men cut off Frank Sinatra's casino credit, the war began. Dean found himself caught between his best friend and his contract. What would Dean do? The whole town whispered the question. Vegas held its breath. Frank Sinatra didn't take the insult quietly. He never did. That wasn't Frank's way. When Carl Cohen, the new casino manager installed by Hughes, informed Frank that his credit line had been suspended pending review, something inside the chairman snapped. Frank drove a golf cart through a plate glass window at 3 a.m. He threw furniture at Cohen in the casino pit. Cohen, a former boxer with hands like sledgehammers, responded with a single punch that knocked out Frank's front teeth. The newspapers called it the night Sinatra lost his teeth. Frank called it betrayal. He packed his bags, his pride, and his entire act, and moved across the street to Caesar's Palace before the sun came up. Everyone expected Dean to follow. The press waited outside the Sands like vultures. The photographers gathered at every entrance. The question on everyone's lips wasn't whether Dean would leave, it was when. But Dean Martin was not Frank Sinatra. He never had been. He never wanted to be. Dean didn't throw furniture. Dean didn't make scenes. Dean didn't let anyone see him sweat. Dean played golf. When reporters cornered him on the 9th hole at the Las Vegas Country Club, microphones thrust toward his face, demanding to know if he would join Frank's exodus, Dean simply smiled that lazy smile and said, "Frank's got his way. I've got mine. I'm still under contract. A deal's a deal." The reporters didn't understand. They thought Dean was being disloyal. They thought Dean was choosing money over friendship. They were wrong. Dean played a different game entirely. And Hughes didn't even know the rules. Howard Hughes interpreted Dean's calmness as submission. Here was a man who could be controlled. Here was a star who understood business. who respected authority, who knew his place in the hierarchy. Hughes began sending memos, not requests, memos, typed on white paper with the Hughes Tool Company letterhead, delivered by men in gray suits who appeared and disappeared like shadows, suggestions about Dean's act, requests for corporate events, demands for schedule changes, instructions about which jokes were appropriate and which jokes needed to be adjusted. Dean responded to each memo the same way. He read it slowly, his brown eyes scanning every word. He folded it neatly, creasing the paper with precision, and then he pulled out his gold Dunhill lighter, a gift from Sinatra, engraved with the words, "To Dino, ain't that a kick in the head," and used the memo to light his cigarette. The ashes would drift onto the expensive carpet of the Copa room. Dean would smile at the Hughes representative watching from the back of the room, a smile that said everything and nothing at the same time. Then he would do exactly what he had always done, his way. For 2 years this silent war continued. Hughes would push. Dean would bend but never break. Hughes would demand. Dean would comply, technically, while subverting every order with charm and patience and that maddening, unbreakable calm. Hughes demanded Dean stop drinking on stage. Dean switched to apple juice in his glass but held it like bourbon, sipped it like bourbon, and made the audience believe it was bourbon. Hughes demanded Dean perform at a corporate function for his executives. Dean showed up, smiled, sang 3 songs, and charged triple his usual fee. Hughes demanded Dean stop mentioning Sinatra in his act. Dean stopped saying Frank's name but sang My Way every single night, staring directly at the Hughes representative in the back row. The ghost was losing, and the ghost didn't even know it. Backstage, the Copa room staff talked about it. The dealers talked about it. Even Hughes's own gray-suited men whispered about it, but only when they were sure no one was listening. Dean Martin didn't fight Howard Hughes. He outlasted him. But in December 1969, the ghost made his final move. The memo that arrived wasn't a suggestion, it wasn't a request, it was an ultimatum, and Dean was ready. December 15, 1969. The dressing room at the Sands Hotel was smaller than people imagined. Just a mirror, a couch, a small bar in the corner. Dean had performed in this room for 17 years. He had watched his reflection age in that mirror. He had celebrated triumphs and mourned losses on that couch. Tonight he sat alone. The contract was on the table in front of him. Thick, legal, final. Hughes's lawyers had spent months crafting every clause, every provision, every trap. Mr. Hughes requires a 5-year exclusive contract. You will perform only at Hughes Properties. Your television commitments will be approved by Hughes Management. Your salary will be adjusted to reflect market realities. Market realities. Dean almost laughed. The richest man in America was trying to pay him less, but the money didn't matter. It had never mattered. Money couldn't buy what Dean had. The contract would give Hughes control over Dean's television show, his movie appearances, his recording sessions. Even his charity work would need approval from the 9th floor of the Desert Inn. Dean Martin would become property, a Hughes acquisition, a line item on a spreadsheet. He thought about the early days, when the Sands was run by Jack Entratter, a man who understood show business. Jack didn't send memos. Jack would come backstage with a bottle of bourbon and say, "Dino, you killed him tonight." That was management. That was respect. He thought about the nights when the Rat Pack owned the Copa room, Frank at the piano, Sammy dancing in the aisles, Peter cracking jokes that made the mob guys in the front row spray their drinks, the champagne flowing, the laughter never stopping, the feeling that they were all young and immortal and nothing could ever touch them. Those nights were gone. The Copa room was just a room now. The magic had followed Frank across the street. Dean pulled out his gold Dunhill lighter. "To Dino, ain't that a kick in the head?" Frank had given him this lighter in 1960, right after Ain't That a Kick in the Head hit the charts. They were celebrating at the Villa Capri, and Frank was drunk, genuinely drunk, not stage drunk. He had pressed the lighter into Dean's hand and said, "For when you need to burn something down, Pally." Dean lit one last cigarette in the dressing room where he had become a legend. Then he picked up a pen. At the bottom of Hughes's contract, in his neat, careful handwriting, the same handwriting he had learned in Steubenville, practicing his new American name over and over until Dino Cressetti became Dean Martin, he wrote 4 words, "I don't work for ghosts." He signed it, Dean Martin. The Hughes representative stood frozen in the doorway. His gray suit suddenly seemed too tight. His flat mechanical voice had abandoned him completely. No one had ever rejected Howard Hughes. No one had ever called him a ghost to his face, or to his paper. Dean stood up slowly. He straightened his tuxedo, the same tuxedo he had worn on opening night, 17 years ago when the world was young and Vegas was wild and anything seemed possible. He walked toward the door. As he passed the Hughes man, he paused, close enough to smell the man's fear, close enough to see the sweat forming on his forehead. "Tell your boss something for me," Dean said. His voice was barely a whisper, but it filled the room like thunder. You can buy a hotel, you can buy a casino, you can even buy a man's contract. He smiled. That smile, the one that had made 1,000 women fall in love with him, the one that had made 1,000 enemies underestimate him. But you can't buy cool. Cool isn't for sale. Never was, never will be. And then, almost as an afterthought, Dean added, Frank was right to leave. I should have left with him. But I wanted to give the ghost a chance, wanted to see if there was a man underneath all that money. He shook his head slowly. There wasn't. Ghosts don't change. They just haunt. Dean had walked away from powerful men before. In Steubenville, in the back rooms of illegal casinos, where the steel workers lost their paychecks, in the alleys where deals went bad, and men reached for weapons. But those men had faces. Those men had names. Those men could look you in the eye when they threatened you. They didn't hide behind memos. This man wasn't even a man. He had nothing but paper and cameras, and 17 years of accumulated silence, and Dean Martin had just set fire to both. He walked out of the Sands Hotel and didn't look back. Dean Martin walked out of the Sands Hotel on December 15, 1969 at exactly 11:47 p.m. He didn't slam doors, he didn't make speeches, he didn't call the press or stage a dramatic exit. He simply walked through the casino floor one last time, nodding at the dealers who had known him for 17 years, winking at the cocktail waitresses who had served him 10,000 drinks. Then he stepped outside, hailed a cab and went home. The next morning he signed a contract with the Riviera Hotel. The terms were better than anything Hughes had offered. More money, more freedom, more respect. The creative control was absolute, and there was one special clause Dean insisted upon: no memos, ever. If the management wanted to talk to Dean Martin, they would do it face to face like men. Howard Hughes, watching through his closed-circuit cameras from the 9th floor of the Desert Inn, saw Dean Martin's taillights disappear into the Vegas night. According to his aide Robert Maheu, Hughes sat in silence for nearly an hour after Dean left. He never mentioned Dean Martin's name again. Word spread through Las Vegas like wildfire. By breakfast, every casino boss, every entertainer, every pit boss and cocktail waitress knew what had happened. Dean Martin had said no to Howard Hughes. Dean Martin had called him a ghost. Dean Martin had walked away from millions of dollars and hadn't even raised his voice. Eddie Torres, the veteran talent agent who helped negotiate Dean's Riviera deal, later recalled, "I've seen tough guys, I've seen mob guys, I've seen men who would kill you for looking at them wrong, but I never saw anyone handle power like Dean handled Hughes. He didn't fight, he didn't argue, he didn't threaten or posture or make demands, he just left, and somehow that was more devastating than any punch Frank ever threw." The contrast with Sinatra couldn't have been sharper. Frank had fought Hughes with his fists and his fury. He had made headlines, he had lost teeth, he had been photographed leaving the sands with blood on his shirt and rage in his eyes. Frank's departure had felt like defeat, a man driven out by forces he couldn't control. Dean's departure, that wasn't defeat, that was victory. A man choosing freedom on his own terms, no drama, no damage, just dignity. Within a year, Howard Hughes fled Las Vegas entirely. On Thanksgiving Day 1970, he was smuggled out of the Desert Inn on a stretcher, bound for the Bahamas, paranoid and deteriorating and surrounded by sycophants who told him only what he wanted to hear. He would never return to Las Vegas. The Sands, once the brightest star on the Strip, became a tired relic. Without the Rat Pack, without the magic, without the laughter that had filled the Copa Room for nearly 2 decades, it was just another building, just another investment that hadn't paid off, just another thing Howard Hughes couldn't buy. We all have our Howard Hughes. We all have that boss, that investor, that powerful figure who thinks they can buy our soul with a big enough check, who thinks that money equals control, who thinks that owning the building means owning the people inside it. Dean Martin understood something that Howard Hughes, for all his billions, never grasped. You can buy a man's time, you can buy his talent, you can even buy his silence, but you cannot buy what makes him who he is. Howard Hughes died on April 5, 1976, on an airplane somewhere over Texas. He weighed 90 pounds. His fingernails were 6 inches long. He was surrounded by strangers, employees who were paid to be there, not friends who chose to be there. He had $2.5 billion and no one who loved him. Dean Martin died on Christmas Day 1995, in his home in Beverly Hills. His children were with him. 78 years of laughter and music and friendship and love, all of it there in the room, invisible but present, like warmth from a fire. He had a gold Dunhill lighter, and everyone who mattered. The emotional math isn't complicated. Money can buy buildings, it can buy hotels, it can buy entire cities if you have enough of it, but it cannot buy what Dean Martin had: the ability to walk into any room and make it brighter simply by being there, the ability to make strangers feel like old friends, the ability to face the most powerful man in America and simply walk away. We all face moments when the easy choice is to surrender, to sign the contract, to take the money, to become what someone else wants us to be. Dean Martin showed us that the hardest thing in the world isn't saying yes to a billionaire, it's saying no, and walking away with your dignity intact. The gold Dunhill lighter still exists. Somewhere, in a collection, or an estate, or a museum case, that lighter sits waiting, engraved to Dino. Ain't that a kick in the head? Dean never used another lighter after that night, even after Frank was gone, even after Vegas changed, even after the world forgot what the Rat Pack meant and the Copa room became a memory. He kept the lighter in his pocket every day, a reminder that some friendships are worth more than contracts, a reminder that some things aren't for sale. So the next time someone tries to buy your loyalty, your voice or your soul, remember the white memo that arrived at 2:47 a.m. Remember the 4 words written at the bottom of an impossible contract. Remember the man who walked out of the most powerful casino in the world with nothing but his dignity. Remember Dean Martin. Remember that cool isn't for sale. Ain't that a kick in the head?